Good afternoon, everyone. And I apologize for the technical difficulties that we were having, but we are all here and we are ready to go. So again, my apologies for the technical difficulties that we had that resulted in us beginning a little bit late. But here we are. So my name is Amani Jennings, and I'm the Dean of Students here at Georgian Court University. And it is my honor and pleasure to walk you all through the residence life plans for reopening for the fall of 2020 semester. On the call, I have with us our Director of Residence Life, Mr. Seth Richards, along with Elizabeth Estelle, who is the Coordinator for Residence Life Operations. And additionally, not listed here, but additionally, we also have our Provost Janice Warner, who I'm sure will be jumping in and just sharing some insight as we walk through this. What my goal is to first kind of give you a really broad overview of where we are based on the state's guidance and recommendations. Briefly walk us through our reopening plans just as an institution. And that may be a point, Provost Warner, where you want to jump in and add any more detail that you feel is necessary. Because again, I want the focus to be on the residence life experience, on the check-in process, and then answer any questions you have pertaining to that. But I do think it's important to just kind of give a really brief overview of what's going on as a state and as a campus beyond residence life. And then we will open it up to any questions that you all may have. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and begin. So please know that our reopening is based on guidance that was issued on the 18th of June, 2020, from the Secretary of Higher Education's office through the Restart Standards for New Jersey Institutions of Higher Education. So every college and university, public or private in the state of university, is basing their reopening plans on the guidance that's been issued through the governor, by the governor through the Secretary of Higher Education. And this is all based on Governor Murphy's Order 155. And in this executive order, there were 20 mandates that are included in the Restart Standards for New Jersey Institutions of Higher Education. I'm not going to go through all of those standards, but I did just want to at least pull out 5 of them that pertain really to higher, not just to higher education, but to the residential experience. So again, there are 20 mandates, and I've only picked out 5 of those just to walk through briefly, just to give you an idea of some of the things that the state has required colleges and universities cover. So 1, training for students regarding COVID-19 sanitation, social distancing practices and protocols as a condition for resuming in-person classes and or living in on-campus residential facilities. Training is also included, I should note, as mandatory for staff, employees, and faculty. But there's definitely going to be some mandatory training for students. Use of face coverings for faculty, staff, students, and visitors, except when doing so would inhibit the individual's health. So face masks, as you all I'm sure are accustomed to, if you're just going into a store, will be a part of the GCU experience. And we'll go into a little bit more detail later when we talk about residential, what that means within the resident halls. Social distancing in classrooms, resident halls, restrooms, and other areas across campus. Limitations on the number of students who may return to resident halls and restricted access to residential common areas. Again, we'll go into more detail on that a little bit later. And performance of health screenings for faculty, staff, students, and visitors prior to entry and education regarding self-monitoring for symptoms. And again, we're going to talk about the screening again. But as you can see, just based on these 5, the state was pretty detailed in what it is expecting colleges and universities to cover and require as a component to being able to reopen for the fall 2020 semester. So based on New Jersey's guidance, there are 3 stages that we're looking at. The stage 1, which is essentially where we ended last semester when the pandemic first hit us and everybody was pretty much forced to shut down. That was stage 1, all in-person instruction, including labs, clinicals, rotations, and all other curricular activity is prohibited. That's what the classroom experience would look like. So essentially we would be all virtual, except for particular areas that have been given approval. And as far as resident halls, no students allowed to reside in a residential facility. And there's a caveat for a very small number of students to whom on-campus housing is their primary source of housing. And again, we'll go into more detail with that a little bit later, but that's stage one. Stage two, which is where we are right now. We are currently in stage two. The classroom experience. Most in-person instruction remains limited to instances where a waiver supported by compelling rationale is obtained from the Secretary of Higher Education. In the residential experience under stage two, limited number of students can return to residential housing on campus. So again, even under stage two, we're limited with the number of students that we will be permitted to have occupy our resident halls. And stage three, which I think is the expectation as to where we will be, and the hope, definitely the hope where we will be by the time the semester begins. Under stage three, the classroom experience, most in-person classroom instruction, labs, and other curricular activity are allowed. And stage three within the resident halls would mean that institutions would continue to operate at reduced capacity as detailed below. And there was just some other information that was in the I copied and pasted this from the state's plans. So as you can see, even under stage three, which is where we're expecting to be, and of course where we hope to be, there is no normal as we know it. There still would be restrictions as to the number of people who are on campus, and there would still be restrictions with the number of people who would be residing within our resident halls. And so let's go into a little bit more detail in terms of what that means. So our reopening plan is going to be sent to the state and will be posted on our website, likely by this Friday, the 24th. It's undergoing its final revisions now, so I guess there's a chance that something could hold that date up, but I think we're pretty good. So expect to see a document that goes into great detail in every area of campus on what our plans are for reopening. So what I want to do briefly, and Provost Warner, again, I feel free to jump in at any point, is to kind of walk you all through what our reopening plans call for the experience beyond just the resident halls. So of course, as we mentioned before, under stage one, classes would continue to be remote instruction only. And under stage two, there would be just a little bit more wiggle room for that, but it would still be mostly virtual under stage two. Under stage three, we will be using a high flex model, which is roughly defined as all necessary course content is provided online using Blackboard. So students would pretty much have an option if courses would be available in person for the most part, but there would also be an online component for that student that says, hey, for whatever reason, I do not feel comfortable coming into class for in-class, in-person instruction. There would be that virtual component. For in-person classes, students would be assigned to group sizes based on recommendations and safety guidelines, which I think the number is 9 or 10, Provost Warner. So if a class is currently assigned and there are 20 people in that class would be broken up so that there would be no more than, I think it's 9 students in that class at one time. In-person sessions will be audio streamed and recorded when possible. Students will not be required to attend an in-person class if they are sick, if they are in isolation, or otherwise unable to travel to campus. So our attendance policy is extremely flexible under the high flex model. And as the last point there notes, that attendance policy, students may not be able, students who are not able to attend in person or the virtual classes for medical reasons, the attendance policy is flexible. So we're looking to accommodate the students as best as we can, particularly in the classroom experience. And I'll pause for a second just to see if there's anything, Provost Warner, you wanted to add to that?
Dean Jennings, you did that perfectly. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're we're focused on having faculty make sure that everything is online so that we can pivot at any moment and so that any student can continue progress in all their classes. And then focus the classroom time for those things that really enhance learning. So spend the classroom time really getting to know the students, making sure you understand what they might be having trouble with, etc., and focusing that time on those sorts of issues. So we're doing our best to make sure that everyone continues to be able to get an excellent academic experience, no matter what the situation ends up being.
So the next point that I'll jump into has to do with screening, testing, and cleaning on campus. And we could spend an hour, 2 hours just on this. So I'm going to try to just be really brief and just focus on some really larger bullet points. But again, there is a lot more detail to this that we just don't have the time to go through right now. So screening, testing, and cleaning. Daily screening will be mandatory through an online questionnaire. So anytime on a daily basis, if someone is coming on campus, they're going to have to fill out a questionnaire, and based on their responses, they will be given the green light to come on campus, or they will be told not to come to campus and to contact their primary healthcare provider. Those questions are still being developed through our nursing department and our health services office. But essentially it has to do with contact someone may have had with someone who's COVID-19 positive, symptoms someone may be experiencing. But that is a daily process that everyone is going to have to go through before coming to campus. So that's one thing. There will be no, as of right now, there will be no on-campus testing. The state has provided us with a list of free testing sites across the state, and a number of those sites are in close proximity to the campus. And so that's where we will be recommending students go unless they have their own access to testing that they may want to utilize. But there is, the state has provided us with a number of free testing sites. And like I said, a number of those sites are in close proximity to our campus. There will be enhanced cleaning in our bathrooms, in our classrooms, hallways, labs, and absolutely within our resident halls. And just to give some brief detail on what that means extensive cleaning beyond just housekeeping, going through the classrooms and wiping. There will be I'm jumping to the next point right now for a moment. There will be hand sanitation stations, cleaning materials within classrooms, high touch point areas such as doorknobs, light switches, you name it, will be cleaned numerous times throughout the day. And so there is a heightened awareness and an effort to enhance the cleaning that we would normally do to make sure that we are not only meeting, but exceeding CDC standards. And I should also mention that that is also the goal. The state's guidance is based in part on what the CDC is mandating. And so our goal as an institution is not just to meet those standards, but wherever we can to exceed those standards. Face masks will be required, as mentioned before, unless there's some kind of medical reason as to why someone cannot wear one. Faculty particularly are going to also have access to face shields because there are those instances where someone may be impaired and they may need to read lips and they can't do that through a face mask. The face shields will be helpful in those types of situations. Social distancing policies are going to be required. So whether it's advisement, counseling, mentoring, you name it. The goal, unless it is absolutely necessary for a faculty member or a staff person to meet with the student in person, those meetings will be held virtually. And if for whatever reason it is required or necessary to meet in person, social distancing will be done. So 6 feet, face masks will be a part of that as well. But that is not a recommendation, that is a requirement. Temperature check stations will be installed in different areas on campus. And our dining halls, temperature checks will be a mandatory part of entering a dining hall, and that's for a student or faculty or staff member who's going going into one of our dining hall locations. And so as you can see we've made every effort to make sure that we are doing all that we can to maintain and provide a safe campus, not only for students, but for faculty, staff, and visitors as well. I'm going to jump now to the next slide. And of course, if there are any questions about any of this, we are going to have a Q&A session later on. So feel free to write down any questions you may have. So our residence life reopening plan, I'm going to go through the 3 stages, and then I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Residence Life, Seth Richards, and our coordinator, Ms. Elizabeth Estelle, to go into greater detail. So Res Life reopened under stage 1, and this is me just copying and pasting directly from the state's guidance. Institutions may not open on-campus residential housing to students, with the exception of students with extenuating circumstances, such as those using on-campus housing as their primary residence. So in the unlikely and worst case scenario, where the governor says we have to go back to stage 1, we would be severely limiting the number of students who would return to campus. And in any instance, we would definitely be communicating this to you all directly and immediately. Stage 2, institutions may permit a limited number of students to return to campus with rigorous adherence to social distancing, cleaning, sanitation protocols, and general safeguards as detailed in Executive Order number 155. So essentially, the state is saying, as you can see from that next bullet point, that under no circumstances as of right now can full occupancy of buildings be acceptable for institutions. So every institution, large, small, private, or public, is reducing the number of students that is bringing back on campus. Under stage 2, common areas such as lounges, shared kitchens, those types of areas, community areas, will either be limited or remain closed. Institutions must develop a policy that limits the number of outside visitors to those with a compelling reason to be in the building. So typically, students will be permitted to have guests from outside campus, whether it is a friend, you name it. Under the guidance issued by the state, that is going to be limited severely. Because again, we're trying to limit the number of people who come within our resident halls. As an exception, staff and immediate family members of a student residing on campus or housing facility who have completed a screening would be permitted. So again, there are some exceptions to that. Institutions must also discourage visitation or visiting between rooms within a building to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. So again, this is just to give you an idea of what the state is telling us our restrictions are if we were to stay in stage 2. So again, we are currently in stage 2. Stage 3, institutions continue to de-densify residential facilities with reduced occupancy limit. Full occupancy, again, under stage 3 is not acceptable by the state. Institutions should continue to be mindful of students for whom campus housing is necessary. Common areas, again, should be limited or remain closed. So again, those common areas such as lounges, kitchens, and those types of areas. And again, even under stage 3, visitation should continue to be limited and monitored so that should we have a positive case, we're able to do the contact tracing that we would need to do. So that is, in a nutshell, what the state has offered as far as guidance for institutions and guidance for residence life. I'm now going to turn it over to our residence life team to go into some greater detail as to what this experience is going to look like for you all, the students and family members coming onto campus. Seth, Elizabeth?
All right. Thank you, Dean Jennings. So I'm going to go through these. Some of it is an overlap because, again, we are guided by the CDC and the state as well. And I will also turn to Elizabeth to answer particulars. Elizabeth handles a lot of the actual placement of students, so really specific numbers and housing questions, she is certainly the person to ask. But shortly, we're just going to go over check-in here and talk about some other policies about how we intend to keep our students safe. So specifically, international students and students that are arriving from out of state, specifically states that are in a high case number list, which can be found at the link that's listed here, we'll be needing to check in on Monday, August 10th. More information is going to come out about that, but essentially, this is guidance that is being updated continuously. But these are students who are going to need to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Before classes begin. So we're asking that students arrive beforehand. Our typical move-in for new students will begin as listed here starting on Monday, and that will go until Wednesday the 19th. So typically under normal circumstances, we would have move-in all in one day, but in this way, we're going to spread it out over 3 days, and students will be assigned check-in times during those 3 days. We're going to be sending out that information on Friday. And so that is spread up so that we can spread students out as much as possible and limit the bottlenecking in buildings and limit as much contact as we possibly can. So more information about exactly when a specific move-in time will be emailed on Friday. If any individual family either can't get off work or can't make their assigned time for any specific reason, please, please, please reach out to us proactively so that we can try and work around that, as we certainly don't want you showing up at a different time and having to delay your move-in process. So we will give students ample time to move in, but we do ask that folks are as efficient as possible and really, just drop the belongings off, move that student in as expeditiously as we can, given the circumstances. So residents will also be permitted to bring 2 people to assist with check-in rather. So these are family members or friends. We ask that only one of those people at a time actually accompany the student inside. Typically, we found that usually there will be one person with the car or where the items are outside, as the student and their companion can go inside. Again, all of this is just to prevent as much traffic as we can. The other thinking with moving the check-in time so spread out is we will be doing intermittent cleaning as much as we can in between these times. Please also understand that typically we would have other students and sort of a move-in crew to help students move in. So if you're a student who's listening to this and you know that you may be by yourself, please know that we won't unfortunately be able to provide physical assistance with you at this time. So please, plan accordingly with that as best as you can. Understand that just because you move in on that day, you can, obviously return to campus later with more belongings, but we're trying to limit the traffic as much as we can. Temperatures will be taken, so there will be an online screening process that we will give more information to that folks will need to fill out before they attend campus. You'll be able to show the results of that screening to our campus safety team, and they'll be helping to facilitate people arriving to campus. So we will have more information on exactly what that screening process looks like, how we'll be administering temperature checks, those sorts of things. Please understand that folks with an elevated temperature will not be permitted to enter the residence hall. So, you will have to stay with the vehicle if that is the case. And all students must have their health forms turned in prior to arrival to campus. So all of this information that we're asking, and we're going to be sending out more, as I mentioned on Friday, please, please, please do your best to get that back to us as quickly as you can so that we can facilitate this move-in process as best we can. And again, if anyone has specific questions, please start adding those to the chat and we can address them later on, as I'm sure folks are going to have questions as we move through this.
And I just want to stress, Seth, before I advance to the next slide, that our campus safety officers will have a list at the front gate, letting them know who is permitted to come onto campus to check in. And if your immunization records have not been completed and submitted to health services, you will not be permitted to even come onto campus. So we just want to stress we're in the midst of a pandemic, and immunization records are more important now maybe than ever. And so we just want to make sure that that you understand that. And if there are any questions that you have about immunization records or health records or anything, our health services office is open during the summer. They are available, and they would be more than willing and happy to help you through whatever issues you may be or questions you may have as far as that's concerned. But it's extremely important, especially now, just to have those records up to date, completed, and submitted to health services. So I'm going to advance to the next slide now, Seth.
While you're doing that, I just want to add, the governor did add 10 new states to the quarantine list just yesterday, and that list is online and updated every week as he updates it. So please continue to check if you are an out-of-state student to make sure where your state stands on that list.
Okay. All right, so again, so this is just alluding to what Dean Jennings had mentioned before, but again, we are beholden to the state guidelines. So if at any point the state is to tighten their restrictions in regard to how many students we have on campus, we will be having to limit that severely. So students will be prioritizing students who essentially are not able to reside anywhere else. So those international students who have arrived here. Also, if this happens after out-of-state students have arrived, we will not be forcing you to take a plane right back. We will be working with students as best we can to make those contingency plans. And also students with documented extenuating circumstance where campus would actually be their primary residence during the year, we would also prioritize those students as well. So a survey is going to be sent out to students also on Friday. And what that survey will entail is anyone who needs it, who may fall into one of these categories, we ask that you would fill that out. We're also going to be working with our Office of Student Success and other shareholders on campus who are helping us sort of compile this list of students that may fall into a category where if we did have to limit our numbers, it is not feasible for them to travel home. So those of you who are local, this is likely would not apply to you, but that survey will be sent out to all students. So please be on the lookout for that on Friday. If you have specific questions about it, please reach out to our office. And we'll be getting into a little more detail about that. So our specific policies to ensure student safety, I won't belabor all of these. All students upon arrival, as they would every year, will get copies of our student handbook, our code of conduct, and they're just simply going to be a little bit more updated and have a focus on social distancing and public health safety measures that we're going to be taking. So again, these are adapted from our CDC guidelines and our state guidelines. And as Dean Jennings mentioned, our goal is not just to meet, but to exceed those, because realistically, this is how we can ensure that students are able to stay on campus and are able to have as close to a traditional experience on campus as possible. So in terms of you're able to get all of those, and every student will see those upon arrival to campus. Just to touch briefly, we do have very specific plans in place for the eventuality that if a student does need to self-isolate, whether or not they're having symptoms and a COVID-19 test is pending, and or a student does test positive, we are prepared for that. So Elizabeth,
did I advance the slide past where you were?
Just a little bit. I was going to roll with it, but if we go back, there we go. So just quickly, for the student safety piece, a lot of these are things that we've already touched on. Excuse me, let me get my place here. So students will be required to undergo frequent medical screenings, and we will be doing spot checks for students to ensure that they are conducting this. We will have an honor policy amongst students that we are all adhering to these things. Students will be expected to wear masks at all times when they are not in their rooms. Overnight visitation will be suspended for the fall semester. And I think that that's a really important point. As new students, you may not be familiar with exactly what that visitation policy typically is, but all of our policies that we're implementing are in an effort to really minimize as much traffic as we can into the residence halls. So the students that are also commuter students or non-resident students will be able to visit, because these are students who are going to be on campus anyway and are undergoing our screenings and are adhering to our guidelines and beholden to those because they are university students, but outside guests won't be permitted. So if a student has a family member or someone who needs to come pick them up, that person can come onto campus and the student can leave with them. However, we're not going to be having guests that are not within the Georgian Court community into the resident halls this semester. This next piece speaks specifically to the day-to-day functionality of the room. So students will be allowed only one guest in their room at a time, and we stress that they must do their best to maintain social distance. This policy with the one guest is really based on the actual physical dimensions of the room. We understand that it feels a little bit punitive, but if we have any more students in that space, social distancing physically becomes impossible. So we suggest that students gather, outside as much as possible, meet virtually, but we really ask that students are not congregating in their specific rooms. And we will be talking about this during orientation. These are not things that you all have to write down and remember right now. We're just going over it broadly, and we'll revisit this upon everyone's arrival to campus. Students will also have personal protective equipment, that hand sanitizers and other cleaning supplies that will be made available to them throughout the semester through our office. We have cleaning supplies that we can give to students to make sure that they personally are going above and beyond, not just the scheduled cleanings that our staff will be doing. And we hope to remind students that these public health protocols, this is how we're all going to be able to stay open. And these rules will be enforced by our residence life staff. So we have updated our conduct policy to include these measures. So we are not trying to be punitive with that. We want to be supportive and make sure that we set our students up for success, but we will be adhering to these policies very stringently, and that goes for myself and my staff and my student staff as well. So Dean Jennings, you're welcome to advance the slide when you get a chance. Okay, so as I was mentioning before, our plans for isolation and quarantine, and as we all know, we throw around the words self-isolation and quarantine a little bit. Typically, the rule is 2 weeks. And so with students who are returning to campus from states, as I mentioned before, will need to go through a 2-week quarantine upon their arrival to campus. And during this time, students will get specific instructions, but broadly, students will not be able to leave their rooms, pending some sort of emergency. And we've gotten questions about, well, if I'm quarantining, am I able to go outside of my room to conduct X, Y, or Z? And while we understand that this is really frustrating, it would defeat the self-isolation process if we had students leaving their rooms, and we would have to really start that process over again. Also, please remember that if you specifically are going through the self-isolation process, if you do leave your room and come into contact with your friends or floor mates or anyone else in the building, they then would also be subject to the self-isolation as per CDC guidelines. So it really does become a domino effect if you're not able to stay in your room. We have worked out a plan with our food vendor to deliver pre-packaged food to students, so they won't need to leave their rooms to go to the dining hall. They will also obviously have access to Wi-Fi and internet to be able to connect in case they have to do anything for class or these sorts of things. And our Office of Residence Life will be open during this time in case there's anything that goes on. We've also talked about students who have folks in the area that they're able to quarantine with. So you would just need to notify our office, and we're going to be creating a waiver where students will be able to say that they're conducting their quarantine period elsewhere, and we would just have to make sure that we check in with those students during that time to make sure that they are adhering to those guidelines as well. And Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about how we're setting up that quarantine process. In terms of a student that is either expressing symptoms or does test positive, students with these symptoms are first encouraged to travel home when needing to isolate if possible, in order to ensure the maximum distance from folks, as well as keeping our spaces free for other students that don't have the ability to travel home. So we have a number of units that we have left offline where we can isolate students. We have a percentage of our total occupancy that we are putting to this cause so that we can quarantine a great number of students if the need were to arise, because it's likely that although it's only one student that's symptomatic, once things like contact tracing happen and we find out who else this student is in contact with, that number of folks who need to self-isolate pending negative COVID-19 test would grow. And obviously, if a student is unable to return home, we do have space on campus where that student will be housed, and they will fall under those same quarantine guidelines. Food will be delivered. They will not be allowed to leave that space until that quarantine process is over. And again, this is a case-by-case basis. We will be in frequent contact with anybody that falls into this category, but this is just sort of a general overview to illustrate how prepared we are for that eventuality.
For the students who will be coming in on August 10th for the 2-week quarantine period prior to classes starting, if you are in a room by yourself or if you are in a room with another person who also has to quarantine, you will be able to quarantine in your own room. For at least the first week, there will be only really you guys in the building, so you will be able to use the common bathrooms, no problem. Once the other students start moving in, we will likely have one designated stall within that bathroom for you to use to limit the amount of high contact items that other students would be encountering. And the only people who would need to go in those separate isolation rooms are people who have roommates who are from New Jersey or who from a state that is not on the quarantine list. So we will be making arrangements for those students to move into one of our quarantine rooms for those first 2 weeks. Once the 2 weeks are up, then they will move into their permanent placement.
And this is just sort of a duplication of the quarantine procedures that we have in place that we'll be looking into.
Yeah, and I'll just, if you don't mind, Seth, I'll just add to this briefly that, of course, isolation is for those students who are experiencing, who may have symptoms or may have been in direct contact with someone who's tested positive. Quarantine are for those who have tested positive. So, of course, and I'm sure with family members, and I'm sure students as well would prefer to be home if they are having symptoms or have tested positive. And again, as Mr. Richards stated, our ask is going to be for those students who can return home in those instances that they do so. But if not, as has been stated, we do have space on campus designated for just that. And our food vendor is prepared to still provide meals for those students, as well as trash disposal and everything else that those students will need. So we are prepared, though on a limited basis, we are prepared to address those situations should they occur. And the last thing I'll add to that is that our health services would be the point of contact for students. So if a student tests positive or if a student is having symptoms, they will contact our health services office and they will walk them through step by step what needs to be done. So at no point is the student left on their own to figure out what they will need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and advance now, Seth.
Yeah, yes, sir. All right, so just briefly, I want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page, and this is going to be what my staff, my resident assistants, my grad assistants, everybody from this is just sort of the guiding principle that we are going to adopt as we go forward. So obviously, those of you students that are listening on this call, the safety of all is depending on the responsibility of you as individuals. So we really encourage students to report any symptoms that they experience, whether their own or those of another student, to health services. I know that this can feel a little bit odd, and we certainly don't want to create a paranoid atmosphere, but we are all protecting one another when we are helping to advocate for folks to touch base with our health services team to get screened. If you don't feel well, we are asking that everyone err on the side of caution, because this is one of those things that we really need to stay on top of and make sure that folks are all taking care of one another. That's really our philosophy here, is that this is the only way that we'll be able to operate safely and stay open, is if folks are all taking care of each other in that regard. And all of these procedures are absolutely necessary to ensure that we stay open and ensure the safety of all of our students that are here. So we will be doing this together, and this will be an ongoing process as folks arrive to campus. So we really encourage everybody to bear that in mind and have this sort of collective public health mentality together as we go forward, because that's the only way that we can all keep each other safe. So I just wanted to make sure that we stress that. And certainly my staff, myself, we are not, the COVID police by any means. We are here to make sure that we are all adhering to these guidelines to keep each other safe. And also, if a student forgets to wear their mask or is in need of one, we want to make sure that they get those supplies. If students have questions about things, we want to answer them. If students are feeling unwell, we want to connect them to resources to get screened to make sure that they are feeling better. All of those sorts of things. That's really what our primary goal is. So I just wanted to make sure that we stated that.
All right, so I know that our final slide here will answer a number of the questions that are currently waiting in the Q&A box below. So as we discussed, even with the stage 3 that we are hopeful we will get to by opening, we do still have to have a reduced capacity, which for us we are calling at 65%, which is based on our numbers, about 325 residents. So right now we are at that 325 number, and we have 8 students currently on our waiting list to get into housing. So as some of our students start making the decision to commute instead of living on, then we will be able to hopefully add some of those students in as well. But our goal is to not go over that 65% number. So we had already done housing assignments when we got some of these guidelines, so we had to modify our housing assignments so that we could spread students out as much as possible to reduce the number of individuals that were using communal bathrooms and to reduce the number of people in as many rooms as possible. So buildings that have private bathrooms have not changed their occupancy. Mercy Hall and St. Catherine Hall both have private bathrooms in their rooms. So if you're part of the honors program living in Mercy Hall, you will still have a 2-person room because you have a private bathroom. So only you and that person will be sharing that bathroom. Maria Hall and St. Joseph Hall both have communal bathrooms, and so those buildings have had their occupancies reduced. So as many students as possible are in single rooms. As of right this moment, every room in Maria Hall is a single room. It is not guaranteed to stay that way for the entire year, as we're hopeful that we will get the virus under control and maybe be able to open up a little bit more in the spring. You may end up with a roommate for the spring semester, but as of right now, we have singles in Maria Hall. That would mean that each wing has roughly 15 to 22 residents in it. That would be sharing a bathroom. Bathrooms in Maria have 4 stalls. The bathrooms in St. Joseph's have 3 stalls. So that is, Maria, I believe, has closer to the 15 people per wing in it. And so that's kind of how we're able to do that. So St. Joseph Hall, which is all upper class students, does still have a few female rooms that are doubles, but all male rooms are singles also. We do have a lower male population than we do a female population. So all new students will be receiving emails about their housing assignments by this Friday the 24th. So a lot of those things will kind of be combined into one email as much as we can, so you're not getting like 5 emails all on Friday. If you log into Simplicity website, which is where you filled out your housing application, you can go on there now and see what your assignment is. That is live and available for you. But we will be sending out emails with that information at the end of this week as well.
All right, so thank you, Seth, and thank you, Elizabeth, for that detail. And I apologize for advancing the slide. I was trying to look at the questions, but every time I touched my screen, it advanced the slide. So we're done now, so I can take a look now at the questions that we have, because we did have a few. But I do think you're correct, Elizabeth, that last slide may have answered some of those questions. But let's go to what we have. You did answer, the first question I have here is how many students are going to be on the resident floor? I think you answered that. Is there any other detail that you want to provide with that? Okay.
I think it's pretty thorough on that one.
And I think you also answered this next question, which is, will there be roommates, or will all dorms be in singles? And again, I think you kind of provided that detail. Anything else you want to add there? Okay. And folks in the audience, please, you can continue to type in questions to the chat, and we will answer them as they come up. Next question is, I know that it's going to be 1 person per room, but is there going to be still going to be 2 beds, 2 desks, and 2 dressers?
Yes, we won't remove any furniture from the rooms because there is still the chance at some point a second person could be put in there, hopefully during the second semester. While you are the only person in there, we don't recommend taking up all of the space because that makes it harder on you if we do end up putting somebody in there later. But there will be no furniture removed from the room.
And another important point to note on that, because this question came up during our Admitted Students Day the other day, but those rooms will not be charged differently. So even if you are the sole occupant, you won't be charged for a single room, which I think is important as well as you're looking at billing and those sorts of things. I think it's also important to note that students who may be in a single room and request a different assignment, we're going to do our best to maintain that students are spread out. So one of the questions I answered yesterday was that it's unlikely that we would move another student in with somebody else to add to that room. So, if students do have specific questions about rooming, please direct that to us.
All right, the next question is, do we have to get COVID tested before we go? And as of right now, the answer to that question is no. I mean, sure, it's great if that's something that you want to do. By all means, go ahead and do so. And I probably be a great recommendation for anyone to get tested. But that is not currently a recommendation. And I'm saying currently because things have been changing so rapidly. As Elizabeth stated, we received guidance on the 18th of June. And typically by the 18th of June, there's a lot that's already done within residence life specifically and on campuses in general in preparation for the fall. So June 18th, we had to shift a lot in accordance to that guidance. And if you're keeping pace with Governor Murphy's daily briefings, you know how quickly things change from one day to the next. So the short answer to that question is no, but I think it's, it would be in everyone's best interest to get tested. And again, in the state of New Jersey, there are numerous free testing sites available. But that is not a requirement for coming onto campus as of right now. Next question is, will this presentation be available after this live call for other family members to view and review? Unfortunately, because some of the issues we had in starting, I did not record this, but we are having another town hall meeting tomorrow. And for that one, I will definitely make sure that it's recorded and that it's available. It's for returning students, but the information for the most part is the same. And that will be available for anyone to view. And for those who, if you have other family members who want to take a look at it and see what's going on. So the information will be available online. And of course, the residence life staff, my office, we are available if anyone has any other questions or concerns that come up after this session that come into your mind. You can feel free to still reach out to us directly or through email. The next question, for international students or out-of-state students that have to isolate themselves for 2 weeks, what do they do about completing their workouts that have been set by their coaches? I will answer this, and if there's anything I'm off on, Provost Warner, please feel free to jump in. But a student who is in isolation should not be practicing. That kind of ruins the whole notion of isolation. So that should not be a requirement set by anyone for a student who does have to isolate. That student, again, during the isolation process, is going to be in the room. Food will be delivered and their needs will be taken care of as best as we can, but there should not be any contact with anyone else because that, by its nature, would ruin the whole process and purpose of isolation.
And I would just add to that, Dean Jennings, that your coaches have been in the conversation, and the athletics department has been in the conversation as we have developed these protocols. So they are well aware that students need to quarantine. They are well aware of what that looks like. So if you do have specific questions about conducting or staying up to speed, please reach out to your coach individually and talk to them, because they know and are aware that you won't be able to practice as usual, and modifications will need to be made. So please reach out to them. They are privy to everything that we planned. We all did this together. So it may just be that if there are, if you already have received some sort of workout regimen that's just going out to all students, please make sure you're reminding your coaches that you do have this, and they can make arrangements for you. As I said, they were in these calls with us. They're familiar, and they will make those accommodations, I'm sure.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is, I already received my room number in Maria Hall. Does this mean I was chosen for housing for fall 2020?
Yes.
Yes, you've been chosen.
We were
Congratulations.
pretty much able to get everyone into a room who submitted their application prior to last Wednesday. If you submitted after last Wednesday, you might be on that wait list. You can reach out to our office if you are unsure, and we can provide more information about that. But if you have a room and a room number on the Simplicity website, you are in that room.
But I do want to stress that in the eventuality that the governor moves us back to stage 1, then we would be forced to reduce our housing population. So there is a chance that someone who's been assigned a room, that assignment would change based on the state taking us back to stage 1. That would be a situation that would be completely out of our control, and we would communicate that as soon as we were made aware. But that is not an eventuality that we are planning for, and certainly not one that we're hoping for. So as of right now, congratulations on being chosen for housing.
And I know that we do have some international students who are considering staying in their home country and being virtual for the fall. I know that we have some local students who are also considering commuting in instead of living on. So we do expect our numbers to change a bit over the next few weeks as people start making those final decisions. But we just can't guarantee anyone past those who already have an assignment that they would get one.
Our next question: if my state gets added to the isolation list late in the game, will I have to adjust my move-in date to August 10th, or am I still allowed my original move-in date? I'll take a stab at this, and then Seth or Elizabeth, you want to jump in. But as Seth mentioned, it seems like every day the governor is adding new states. So there is a chance that your state is green right now, but coming the next day or whenever, it's going to change. And at that point, you just need to contact us, although we would be aware and would probably contact you first, honestly, so that we can make arrangements. Because as of right now, based on what the state is saying, you would need to adjust your move-in date. But we're monitoring students coming from out of state. We're monitoring the list that the governor is mounting in terms of states that students need to quarantine. And we're trying to be proactive as much as possible. So it's likely that someone from Residence Life would reach out to you in that situation. Seth or Elizabeth, anything you want to add?
One thing I think is important to add, just to maybe allay some anxiety around that, and Provost Warner, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if this were the case and a move-in date had to be a little bit later and quarantining did run up against when classes start, that's not something that would affect your ability to virtually attend, or to obviously that would not affect your ability to start your classes, and you wouldn't fall behind due to a circumstance that was beyond your control.
Absolutely, Seth, you have that exactly right. And that's why we're using the high flex model, so that we can handle everybody's situation.
Next question. So if we are in single rooms and allowed to have one person in our rooms, can our roommate dorm next to us? So I guess the question is, if they would typically have a certain person as a roommate, could that person be assigned to the room next to them?
They might be. As I was moving people around, I did tend to I'm going to pull this up here. I have an actual floor plan with sticky notes and people's names on them, and this is how I moved people around. So in most cases, I did literally just pick one person up and move them next door to an open room. It's not necessarily the case, depending on where the rooms were open and where people had already been assigned. So your original requested roommate could be right next to you. They could be on a different floor. At this point, I don't really want to move a lot more people around, because we're already trying to do a lot of movement and trying to get people where they need to be with the quarantine spaces. But they might be next to you, they might not.
One thing I'd like to add, from Elizabeth and I, sort of as a team and a two-person team and a logistical standpoint, we do ask that if students have really specific requests about these sorts of things, let's all get there, right? Let's move in. Let's get everyone on campus. Let the dust settle a little bit. And if folks do have specific questions about logistics or things that we can move around, we can look at that beforehand. But we are trying to be really, really thoughtful and intentional about how we're staggering move in. We don't want to overload certain bathrooms and certain wings. We want to really, really, really minimize traffic and things as much as we possibly can. So the answer to the question is a lot can be done. We are an office that does our best to accommodate students. It's the name of the game. But I do ask that folks, if you have very specific questions like that, please hang on to them, let us know. But let's get everybody in the residence hall safely and sort of see where we're at. And there are likely some students maybe who are reserved for rooms right now that won't show up. And so there may be vacancies we're not anticipating and other variables, but I ask that we all get in together and then we'll sift through that together.
Our next question, in the honors dorm, if I am out of state, but my roommate isn't, will I be quarantined in another room?
That is not likely because our quarantine rooms are in the same building as the honors students. So the whole first floor of Mercy Hall are our quarantine rooms because they have private bathrooms. And so students can truly quarantine themselves in those rooms. So likely you would just be the floor below.
Great. Our next question, will the dining hall be open? And I guess this is a point of great expectation for all of us because we do have a brand new dining vendor and we are excited to see what they're going to bring to campus. The dining halls will be open. Like I said, there will be limited occupancy just based on state and CDC guidance. And there will be temperature checks for those entering the dining halls. So of course, it's not going to be normal under no circumstance, but yes, the dining halls will be open. Is there anything anyone wants to share with that, Ed?
I will say if during the self-isolation quarantine period, meals will be delivered to those students, but once other students arrive to campus, that is when the dining hall will actually open for them.
Absolutely. Next question, how many of the 325 residents are in-state versus out-of-state or international?
Oh, I don't have specific numbers on that, and I can't get them without closing out of the Zoom. I would say most of our students are in-state, and of the out-of-state students, most of them are from New York or Pennsylvania, which are right now not on our quarantine list. Initially, with our list of people who need to quarantine total, I think we're looking at between 50 and 75 people as a whole, but I don't have those exact numbers.
Okay. So a good amount of students.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, will students have access to the gym or to do outdoor exercises? I think I can answer that question. Outdoor spaces are certainly going to be available. We are looking to identify certain outdoor spaces specifically in order to densify the indoor spaces. We're looking to identify certain outdoor spaces for different purposes. Under stage 2, the gym would be closed. And we are honestly really looking to keep certain spaces closed just to be able to minimize close contact with the large groups of students. And the gyms are one of those spaces. Provost Warner, I'm not sure if there's any particular plans that athletics has in terms of gym usage. I'm assuming the teams will have access to that.
Possibly not inside, at least at first. They're still working out those specific plans. So I don't have the details yet. But indoors is going to be limited for some time.
One great thing about one of the great things about our campus is that we have plenty of picturesque outdoor space. And so outdoor exercises will definitely be available and recommended. Next question, if my roommate and I are both from the same state on the list for quarantine, can we quarantine together? We are living in Mercy Hall.
Yes, any roommate pair that are both quarantining will be quarantining together in their own room.
Thank you. Next question, will we be able to bring our food back to our rooms, or is there going to be in-house dining for the dining hall? Students will be permitted to bring food back into your rooms. Provost Warner, I saw you took yourself off mute.
I was just going to say, we're also setting up some outdoor spaces for dining to make it, someplace to go and to eat and to relax a little bit. So certainly you can bring it back to your room. There will be some space inside once we move to the stage 3, but there also is spaces being put together for outside dining to just give a little bit better, pleasant environment for doing that.
Our next question, are we able to ship things to our dorms, cleaning stuff, decorations, etc., and how?
Yes, you can. We are recommending that people limit the things that they bring with them in case that things recede and we have to go back to stage 2 or even stage 1 to make it easier for people to move their things out in a quick manner. We do recommend that people are limiting the things that they bring. If you do want to have things shipped to your room here, that is totally possible. You would just you would mail it to the campus address. So everyone uses the same address, which is the 900 Lakewood Avenue address. And then once it reaches the mailroom, they have a copy of the roster and assigned mailboxes to everyone. So they would email students who have received packages with their location and hours to come pick up the package that they have received.
So Elizabeth, would they put at attention residence life just to make sure that it gets to the resident?
No, all mail goes directly to the mailroom once it comes onto campus. And so they go through and they have all of the list of room numbers. They look people up and have a space set aside to keep packages, and then would email the students upon their arrival. Any office mail then gets moved out to those offices. And if there's ever a question about if somebody belongs on campus or is living on campus, the mailroom actually emails me about it first.
Okay, thank you.
Make sure as long as the student's name is on it, if you're using mom or dad or auntie's, Amazon Prime, just make sure that it has your name listed so that we can find you.
Good point. Good point. Next question. If my roommate and I are both from, that was a duplicate question. Is it correct, apparently, that interactions with offices may remain remote? Is it correct that interactions with offices may remain remote? Provost Warner, I see you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, so we're still working on that a little bit, but yes, our student offices definitely will ask you to at least set up an appointment. And in some cases, then you may meet in person, either in their office or some other space. So we're working on all the details, but it is always important to check whether the office is open, call ahead, because we definitely have to make sure that there's not too many people at any one space. So we're not going to have any lines or queuing or anything like that. So more information will become clearer as we get closer to opening date. But for the fall, it's definitely best practice to call ahead before showing up at an office.
Next question. Can I move in with my roommate after the 2-week quarantine in a different room? So I guess the student is saying if they're out of state or international and they're quarantined for 2 weeks, can they move in with their roommate into a different room afterwards?
If you have a roommate, then you will be moving into your permanent room with that roommate after the 2-week period. Yes. If you are in a single room, we will not be then moving people into double rooms.
Next question. How many, and I'm going to try to be a little bit quicker with the questions in the interest of time. How many of the 325 students are freshmen?
I don't have an exact number for that either, but I would guess in the neighborhood of 80.
Is the food plan still the 5-day or 7-day plan?
It is only 7-day. Every resident has the same exact meal plan, 19 meals a week, 7 days a week. The new vendor decided to keep that for this year for continuity's sake, since they just took over in July. For next year, that may change depending on what they discover from usage this year.
And I should also add that, like Elizabeth mentioned, the new vendor took over in July when these things had already been decided. But they are looking to open up a process, and students will be a part of that process in terms of looking at different options for meal plans. And so just keep an eye out, because we will be looking for student groups, student committees to have input into what any changes are going to be made to the dining program or the meal plans that are offered. The questions are coming in really fast now, and it's moving my start down here. Will there still be activities planned for resident students to hang out?
Yeah.
I would say yes. Not only planned through the Office of Residence Life, but also through campus activities. Of course, we are looking to limit how we gather students together. And yes, there will definitely be virtual programming that's done. But when and where we are able, we are going to look to bring students together when it's safe and appropriate to do so. But just keep in mind that will be limited.
And I'd just like to do a shameless plug quickly that the better we are about our masks and our PPE and our social distancing and our adherence to guidelines, the more likely it is that we get to do the fun things. So just a quick little plug there, because that is definitely a determinant of how much we are able to do those sorts of things.
Next question. In case one is dependent on common things like kitchen and refrigerator to begin with, will there be a possibility of access?
Students can have their own mini fridges in their rooms. We will not be having access to building kitchens. Almost all of the buildings do have a kitchen in them, but given just safety with usage, those will not be accessible to students. So you can have your own refrigerator, but not a kitchen.
Next question. I still haven't received a roommate, and I wanted to know, if I don't have a roommate before my move-in date, does that mean I'm in an isolated room?
Well, isolation is in terms of like quarantine. No,
I think they just mean, will they be getting a roommate? Like, will they stay in a single room?
Our goal is for it to stay in a single room as long as possible until we are hopefully able to allow more students to live on campus.
Next question. If my roommate tests positive for COVID, goes into quarantine, does our dorm room get thoroughly disinfected by GCU? And the answer to that question is yes. And I would also add that if a roommate goes into, gets tested positive and goes to quarantine, the same would pretty much certainly be for the roommate of the person who tested positive. Based on CDC standards, that the proximity that roommates have with one another would require that both of those individuals be isolated, and the room would absolutely be cleaned in a very precise and enhanced manner. Yes. Next question. Are they still allowing fraternities on campus with the pandemic? We have over the past few years had step shows on campus. Those have typically been large events with a large group of people in one space. That is typically the type of event right now that we are not permitted to have based on occupancy rates and levels that the state has issued. So those types of events right now we are not having, but if there's a type of event that a fraternity or sorority wants to have on campus, and it falls in line with the guidance that we've been issued by the state and by the CDC, then we would be more than willing to do so. And it also depends on what stage we're in through the state.
If you were looking to join a fraternity or sorority, we don't have stereotypical fraternities and sororities on this campus.
Correct. There are not the traditional social fraternities and sororities on campus for a student to join currently. If I move into the resident halls, and I think these are going to be our last three questions based on time. If I move into the residence hall and my classes are online, can I go back home, and will my money be returned? If I move into the resident halls and my classes are online, can I return home, and will my money be returned? I'll take an attempt to answer that. So if a student chooses to move into the resident hall, knowing that their classes are online. That's a choice that that student is making. And any refund that that student is issued, should they later on choose to return home, will be based on the amount of time that they were on campus, and also the agreements that we have with our food vendor, which is also unique. So the short answer to that question, it all depends on the amount of time that the student has stayed in the room. That is what any refund will be based off of that. Is there anything with that you want to add, Provost Warner? Okay. Are microwaves allowed in the rooms?
No, you can have a refrigerator, but not a microwave.
Okay. Under quarantine, will we be able to do laundry? No, there will be no laundry in the resident halls. I'm kidding. Yes, absolutely. You will not only be allowed to do laundry, but you will be encouraged to do laundry. Anything you want to add, Seth?
Just because it does say under quarantine, so these are students that either have self-isolated or so it's a little bit different, I think, than just,
okay.
Yeah, so I think we need to be specific about that.
And I read that wrong. I was just thinking under the current situations. So if a student is quarantined, we will be making arrangements through our facilities vendor, our housekeeping vendor, to take care of those types of needs. So along with food, trash disposal, and those types of things, accommodations will be made so that those things can be done without the student having to leave the room. So that concludes, there are no more questions. As I stated, I'll just do this one last question that just came up. Do all residency buildings have available laundry facilities, as well as do you have to pay to use these facilities? So we're in the process right now of updating our laundry facilities. I will state, and in the spirit of transparency, the vendor that is going to be upgrading our laundry facilities, the pandemic has hit them hard as well. So while our goal was to have all of this done over the summer, the vendor that's going to be upgrading our laundry facilities, they're dealing with layoffs and they're dealing with furloughs and other things. So that is a process that's not going to occur over the summer, but hopefully we'll be able to get it done sometime during the fall semester. And the goal is that there will be no additional cost for using the laundry facilities. Currently, there is a laundry card. You put money on the card, and that's how you do your laundry. That's the process in a nutshell. And stop me if I'm wrong there, Elizabeth or Seth.
That's right.
But once the upgrade comes through, that will not be the case, and there will be no additional cost for using those laundry facilities. But unfortunately, the pandemic has impacted the laundry industry as well. And the vendor was just not able to come in and do that over the summer due to their own circumstances. So again, if there are any other questions that come up about anything, you can feel free to respond or reach out to the Residence Life staff directly. You can reach out to myself. We are here, we are working over the summer, and I understand that there may be some questions that come up that you're not thinking of now, but please reach out to us beforehand so that we can make sure when you do move in, you are comfortable and content and have all the information that you're going to need. So having said that, I want to thank Provost Warner for spending some time with us in responding to some of the questions. Elizabeth and Director Richards, thank you for doing all that you're doing to make sure that the check-in process is as clear, as clean, and as user-friendly as possible. And students out there, welcome to Georgian Court. This is not the way that we wanted to welcome you to our campus, but it is what it is, and we're going to do the best that we can to make your on-campus experience as engaging and impactful as possible. So again, reach out to us if you have any other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.